Mara had always known the land would shape her fate, but nothing in her past could have prepared her for the day the wind changed and the world she knew began to unravel. In Dustvale, the wind was a living thing, restless, dry, and relentless, scouring the skin and soul of anyone who tried to tame it. The sky stretched wide and pale above the endless sweep of ochre grass and cracked earth, and the sun burned away all softness, leaving only what could endure. Mara had endured more than most, and it showed in the way she carried herself, tall, broad-shouldered, her black hair braided tight, her eyes the color of storm clouds over the mesa. She was a stranger everywhere, even to herself. On the morning her life changed, Mara stood barefoot in the dust behind the auction platform, a heavy iron shackle biting into her ankle. The crowd gathered in Red Bluff Square was restless, their faces drawn by curiosity and something darker. She was the last lot of the day, the one no one wanted. The auctioneer's voice, usually sharp and eager, faltered as he read her description. Mara, age unknown, strong as a mule, too wild for any man to keep. The words hung in the air, and Mara felt them settle on her shoulders like another weight. She did not flinch, did not lower her gaze, but stood silent and still, letting the sun beat down on her as if it might burn away the memory of all that had come before. No one bid. The crowd shifted, some with pity, most with suspicion. Whispers moved through the air, stories of fights, of men left broken, of a girl who did not cry when the whip came down. Mara heard them all, but she had learned long ago that words could not cut as deep as hunger or cold iron. She waited, her chin lifted, her hands loose at her sides, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. At the edge of the crowd, Jonas Creed watched with the same wary detachment he brought to every gathering in Red Bluff. He was a man marked by solitude, his face weathered by sun and loss, his eyes the color of old whiskey. Jonas had not come to the auction for company. He needed help on the ranch, nothing more. The drought had left his land brittle and his herd thin, and he had no patience for the gossip or the sideways glances that followed him wherever he went. The Creed name still carried weight in these parts, but it was the weight of old debts and older grief. When the auctioneer's voice faltered for the third time, Jonas raised his hand. The sum he named was low, almost insulting, but no one else spoke. The crowd laughed, a brittle sound, but the auctioneer was quick to accept, eager to be rid of the girl who had unsettled even the hardiest men. Jonas stepped forward, his boots stirring the dust, and took the chain from the auctioneer's hand. He did not look at Mara as he unlocked the shackle and handed her a pair of battered boots. She put them on without a word, her movements careful and deliberate, then followed him through the thinning crowd, her shadow stretching long behind her in the late afternoon sun. They left Red Bluff in silence, riding west into the teeth of the wind. Jonas's horse was steady, accustomed to the quiet, and Mara rode behind him, her hands resting lightly on the saddle, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The land rolled out before them, a patchwork of dry grass and stubborn sage, broken only by the fence lines and the distant shimmer of heat. Creed's End lay 40 miles from the nearest neighbor, a scatter of weathered buildings clinging to the edge of the world. Jonas pointed to the bunkhouse when they arrived, told Mara she would sleep there, not in the main house. She nodded, her face unreadable, and set about washing the dust from her skin at the pump. He left her a shirt and trousers, old but clean, and watched from the porch as she braided her hair again, her movements practiced and unhurried. Night fell quickly in Dust Vale, the sky deepening to indigo as the last light bled from the hills. Jonas sat on the porch, listening to the wind and the distant creak of the barn, his thoughts circling the same old tracks. He wondered what kind of trouble he had brought home. But the truth was, trouble had been his only companion for years. The ranch was quiet, and the silence pressed in on him until he could almost hear the echo of his brother's laughter. Long gone now, carried away by the same wind that rattled the windows and whispered through the grass. Mara lay awake in the bunkhouse, staring at the ceiling, her body aching from the long ride and the weeks before. She listened to the sounds of the ranch, the restless horses, the distant call of a coyote, the steady rhythm of Jonas's footsteps on the porch. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew how to wait. Waiting was a skill she had learned in the dark places, in the cages and the cold, where hope was a dangerous thing. She closed her eyes and let the night settle over her, heavy and familiar. The days that followed fell into a rhythm as old as the land itself. Mara rose before dawn, her breath clouding in the chill air, and set to work without waiting for instruction. She mended fences, hauled water, mucked stalls, and moved through the chores with a quiet efficiency that surprised Jonas. She ate last at every meal, fed the animals before herself, and spoke only when spoken to. Jonas watched her from a distance, noting the scars on her arms, the way she flinched at sudden noises, the careful way she kept her distance from him and everything else. He did not ask about her past, and she did not offer. The ranch was a hard place, made harder by the drought and the memories that clung to every corner. Jonas worked alongside Mara, his silence matching hers. And together, they kept Creed's End from falling into ruin. The work was endless, the days long. But there was a strange comfort in the routine. At night, Jonas sat by the fire, the old dog at his feet, and listened to the wind rattle the windows. Sometimes, he heard Mara humming softly in the bunkhouse, a tune he did not recognize, low and mournful. Mara found a kind of peace in the work, though she would not have called it that. The land was harsh, but it was honest, and the pain in her muscles was a pain she understood. She kept her head down, her words few, and let the days pass in a blur of sweat and dust. She did not expect kindness, but Jonas was fair, and that was enough. She watched him, too, saw the way he carried his grief like a stone in his pocket, the way he looked at the empty chair at the table, the way he lingered over the grave on the hill at sunset. She did not ask about his brother, and he did not speak of him. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills and the sky turned the color of old copper, a storm rolled in from the west. The air grew heavy, charged with the promise of rain, and the horses grew restless in their stalls. Jonas was in the barn, checking the roof for leaks, when he heard a sudden commotion in the corral. He stepped outside, boots sinking into the mud, and saw the young stallion barely broken, wild-eyed, kicking at the gate, panic in every line of its body. Before Jonas could move, Mara was there. She moved with a calm that belied her size, her voice low and steady as she approached the horse. She did not shout or wave her arms, did not reach for a rope or a whip. Instead, she stood her ground, letting the animal see her, feel her presence. The stallion snorted, pawed the ground, but Mara did not flinch. Slowly, she reached out, her hand open, and waited. The horse hesitated, then stepped forward, nostrils flaring, and let her touch its neck. She stroked its mane, whispered something Jonas could not hear, and led it back to the shelter as the first drops of rain began to fall. Jonas watched from the shadows, something shifting in his chest. He realized then that Mara was not what the town had said she was. She was not wild, not dangerous at least, not in the way they feared. She was simply someone who had survived too much, who had learned to keep her strength hidden until it was needed. He felt a flicker of something he had not felt in a long time: respect, maybe, or the beginning of trust. That night, as the rain drummed on the roof and the wind howled through the cracks, Jonas sat by the fire, thinking of all the things he did not know about the woman sleeping in the bunkhouse. He wondered what had brought her to that auction, what she had lost, and whether she would ever find a place to belong. He did not have answers, but for the first time in years, he realized the weight of his own loneliness had lifted, just a little. Mara lay awake, listening to the storm, her mind drifting between memory and the present. She thought of the men who had tried to break her, the places she had been, the names she had been called. She thought of Jonas, of the way he had looked at her, not with fear or pity, but with something like understanding. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, she was safe, and that was enough. As dawn broke over Dustvale, the world was washed clean. The air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. Mara rose before the sun, her boots leaving fresh prints in the mud, and set to work as she always did. Jonas found her in the garden, her hands deep in the soil, planting seeds for a future neither of them could yet imagine. He stood for a moment, watching her, then picked up a shovel and joined her in the dirt. The sun rose higher, and for a while, there was only the sound of birds and the promise of something better growing beneath their feet. Mara moved through the days at Creed's End with a quiet determination that did not go unnoticed. The land was still hard, the work unending, but something in the air had shifted since her arrival. Jonas watched her from a distance at first, uncertain what to make of the woman who never asked for rest, who took to every task as if it were a test she could not afford to fail. She rose before the sun, her boots already caked with dust, and worked until the last light faded from the sky. She mended fences with hands that bore old scars, lifted bales of hay as if they weighed nothing, and calmed the most skittish horses with a patience that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. Jonas found himself relying on her more than he had expected. The ranch, which had once felt like a burden too heavy to carry alone, began to show signs of life again. The animals grew calmer, the fields less wild, and the house itself seemed to settle, as if recognizing a new presence within its walls. Mara never complained, never hesitated, and never asked for more than what was given. She ate in silence, always last. When the day's work was done, she would sit on the porch steps, her gaze fixed on the horizon, as if searching for something she had lost long ago. It was during these quiet evenings that Jonas began to notice the marks on her arms and neck, thin, pale lines that crisscrossed her skin, some faded with time, others still angry and red. He wondered about their origin, but he did not ask. In Dustvale, everyone carried scars, though most were hidden beneath shirts or behind guarded eyes. Mara's was simply harder to ignore. One afternoon, as the sun hung low and the air shimmered with heat, Jonas returned from the far pasture to find Mara kneeling by the creek, washing blood from her hands. At first, he thought she had been hurt, but as he drew closer, he saw a small figure lying in the shade of a cottonwood tree. It was a boy, no older than 12, his clothes torn and filthy, his face streaked with dirt and fear. Mara had wrapped a strip of cloth around his leg, staunching a wound that looked fresh and deep. The boy's eyes darted between them, wild and mistrustful, but he did not try to run. Jonas knelt beside Mara, his voice low and steady as he asked what had happened. The boy did not answer, only clutched at the earth with trembling fingers. Mara met Jonas's gaze, her expression unreadable, and together they lifted the boy and carried him to the bunkhouse. There, Mara cleaned the wound with water from the pump, her hands gentle but sure. Jonas found an old shirt for the boy to wear and set a plate of bread and beans on the table. The boy ate in silence, his eyes never leaving Mara. That night, the ranch felt different. Jonas sat by the fire, listening to the wind and the soft sounds of Mara moving about the bunkhouse. He wondered where the boy had come from, what dangers had driven him across the open land, and why he seemed to trust Mara more than anyone else. The next morning, the boy was still there, curled up on a cot, his breathing slow and even. Mara watched over him, her face softer than Jonas had ever seen it. As the days passed, the boy who finally gave his name as Finn began to recover. He spoke little, but when he did, it was to Mara. She taught him how to tend the animals, how to move quietly through the barn, how to listen for the sound of trouble on the wind. Finn followed her everywhere, mimicking her movements, his fear slowly giving way to something like hope. He was still thin and pale, his eyes shadowed by sleepless nights, but he clung to Mara's presence as if it were a lifeline. Jonas saw the change in both of them, the way Mara's shoulders eased when Finn was near, the way Finn's eyes brightened when Mara praised his work. Jonas found himself drawn into their orbit, the three of them forming a fragile circle of trust. He began to share more of himself, telling stories of his brother, of the days when Creed's End had been filled with laughter and light. He spoke of the accident that had taken his brother's life, of the guilt that had settled over him like a second skin. Mara listened without judgment, her silence a kind of comfort. In return, she offered small pieces of her own story memories of places she had been, of hands that had hurt her, of nights spent in cages, and days spent running from men who saw her as nothing more than a thing to be owned. Jonas realized then that Mara's scars were not just marks on her skin, but reminders of a life spent surviving. He saw the way she flinched at sudden noises, the way she kept her back to the wall in any room, the way she watched the road for signs of strangers. Finn, too, carried his own shadows. He woke from nightmares, his cries muffled by the pillow. And sometimes he would disappear for hours, hiding in the tall grass or beneath the porch, afraid of something he could not name. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and the sky turned a deep, bruised purple, Jonas found Mara and Finn sitting together on the porch. Finn was carving a piece of wood with a small knife, his brow furrowed in concentration. Mara watched him, her expression soft, her hands folded in her lap. Jonas sat beside them, the three of them silent as the first stars appeared overhead. The air was thick with the scent of sage and the distant hum of crickets, the kind of night that made the world feel both endless and close. It was in these quiet moments that Jonas felt the old ache in his chest begin to ease. He saw the way Mara looked at Finn, not with pity, but with a fierce protectiveness that reminded him of his own mother. He saw the way Finn looked at Mara, as if she were the only safe place in a world full of danger. Jonas realized that, for the first time in years, Creed's End felt less like a tomb and more like a home. But peace in Dustvale was always fragile. One afternoon, as Mara and Finn were gathering eggs in the henhouse, Jonas spotted a group of riders on the far ridge. They moved slowly, their faces hidden by wide-brimmed hats, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. Jonas watched them through the spyglass, his jaw tight. He recognized the look of men who were searching for something or someone. That night, Jonas kept watch from the porch, his rifle across his knees. The riders did not approach, but their presence lingered like a threat. Mara sensed it, too. She moved through the house with a new wariness, checking the locks, making sure Finn stayed close. Finn grew quiet, his eyes darting to the windows, his hands trembling when he thought no one was looking. Jonas tried to reassure them, but he knew the truth. Trouble had a way of finding those who tried to outrun it. He began to ask Finn gentle questions, trying to piece together the boy's story. Finn resisted at first, but one night, as the wind howled outside and the fire burned low, he spoke in a whisper. He told Jonas and Mara about the place he had run from, a home for lost children. Run by men who promised safety but delivered only pain. He spoke of locked doors, of punishments for those who disobeyed, of friends who had disappeared in the night. Mara listened, her face pale, her hands clenched in her lap. She understood more than she let on. Later, when Finn had fallen asleep, she told Jonas about her own time in places like that, about the men who had bought and sold her, about the experiments they had performed, about the scars that would never fade. Jonas listened, his heart heavy with anger and sorrow. He realized then that the world was full of people like Finn and Mara, people who had been broken and left to mend themselves. The days grew tense as the riders continued to circle the ranch. Jonas and Mara took turns keeping watch, their eyes always on the horizon. Finn stayed close, his fear a constant presence. One night, as the moon hung low and the air was thick with the scent of rain, Jonas found a note pinned to the barn door. The message was simple, written in a rough hand. "The boy belongs to us. Give him back, or we'll take him." Jonas read the note in silence, his jaw clenched. He showed it to Mara, who read it once and then burned it in the stove. They did not speak of it, but the message was clear. The peace they had found was under threat, and the past was not done with any of them. That night, as the wind rattled the windows and the rain began to fall, Jonas sat by the fire, his thoughts heavy. He looked at Mara, who sat across from him, her face lit by the flickering light. He saw the strength in her, the resilience that had carried her through so much. He saw the way she watched over Finn, the way she moved through the world with a quiet determination that refused to be broken. Jonas realized then that they were no longer just survivors, no longer just strangers bound by circumstance. They were something more, a family, forged in hardship and held together by the scars they shared. As the storm raged outside, Jonas felt a flicker of hope, fragile but real, growing in the ashes of all they had lost. The next morning, the world outside was washed clean by the rain, but the air was heavy with uncertainty. Mara rose early, her steps careful as she checked the fences and the barn, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the riders. Finn helped her, his small hands steady as he gathered eggs and fed the horses, his trust in Mara growing stronger with each passing day. Jonas watched him from the porch, a quiet pride stirring in his chest, mingled with worry for what might come. The three of them moved through the morning together, bound by a silent promise to protect one another, whatever the cost. And as the sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the land, Jonas knew that whatever trials lay ahead, they would face them not as strangers, but as something closer to kin. Mara felt the tension in the air before the others did, a heaviness that settled over Creed's End like a storm waiting to break. The days grew shorter, the wind sharper, and every sound on the horizon seemed to carry a warning. She moved through her chores with a new wariness, her eyes always scanning the ridgeline, her hands never far from the old rifle Jonas kept behind the door. Finn sensed it too. He grew quieter, his laughter rare, his gaze flickering to the windows as if expecting shadows to move there. Jonas tried to keep the routine steady, but even he could not ignore the unease that crept into every corner of the ranch. The riders returned, this time bolder, circling closer to the house, their faces hidden beneath the brims of their hats. At night, the three of them would sit together in the kitchen, the lamp burning low, listening to the distant sound of hooves and the restless wind. Finn slept fitfully, waking from nightmares that left him shaking and silent. Mara sat with him until he calmed, her presence a quiet anchor in the dark. Jonas watched them both, feeling the old ache of responsibility settle heavier on his shoulders. One evening, as the sun bled red across the hills, Finn finally spoke of the place he had run from. His voice was thin, almost lost in the hush of the room. He told them about Trisable, a place that called itself a home for lost children, but was nothing of the sort. He described long halls lined with locked doors, the cold hands of men who measured and marked, the endless drills and punishments for those who failed to obey. He spoke of children taken away in the night, of experiments whispered about in the dark, of friends who never returned. Mara listened, her face pale, her hands clenched tight in her lap. She recognized the words, the fear behind them, and something old and cold stirred in her chest. Jonas felt anger rise in him, a slow burn that made his jaw clench. He promised Finn that he would not be sent back, that Creed's End would be a place of safety. But even as he spoke, he wondered how long they could hold out. The riders were not just men looking for a runaway. They were part of something larger, something that reached beyond the borders of Dustvale. Mara's nights grew restless. She dreamed of cages and cold rooms, of voices calling her by numbers instead of names. She remembered the sting of the whip, the taste of blood, the way hope had been stripped from her piece by piece. She woke in the dark, her heart pounding, afraid that she would become what they had tried to make her, a tool, a weapon, something less than human. She watched Finn as he slept, saw the same shadows flicker across his face, and wondered if she could protect him from the fate she had barely escaped. Jonas and Mara began to plan. They knew they could not face the threat alone. Jonas remembered a woman named Clara who had once worked for the men who ran Tree Sable. She had left the organization years before, her conscience too heavy to bear. Jonas believed she might have information that could help them. He and Mara decided to seek her out, leaving Finn in the care of a trusted neighbor for a single night. The journey to Clara's homestead was long, the road winding through canyons and over dry riverbeds, the sky above them heavy with the promise of rain. Clara lived in a small house at the edge of the valley, surrounded by wild sage and the ruins of old dreams. She greeted Jonas with weary eyes, her hands rough from years of hard work. Mara watched her closely, searching for any sign of deceit. Clara listened to their story in silence, her face unreadable. When Jonas asked about Trey Sable, Clara's expression darkened. She spoke of ledgers kept in locked drawers, of names and numbers, of children bought and sold like cattle. She told them where to look, warned them of the men who would do anything to keep their secrets buried. As they prepared to leave, a storm broke over the valley, rain lashing the earth, turning the road to mud. Jonas and Mara pressed on, urgency driving them through the night. When they returned to Creed's End, the house was dark, the door ajar, the neighbor gone. Finn was missing. Panic rose in Jonas's chest, cold and sharp. Mara moved through the house with a deadly calm, searching for any sign of struggle. They found a scrap of cloth near the barn, a boot print in the mud, and the unmistakable mark of a horseshoe burned into the earth. The world narrowed to a single purpose: finding Finn. Jonas and Mara set out before dawn, following the trail through the rain-soaked fields and into the hills beyond. The land was unforgiving, the mud sucking at their boots, the wind howling through the canyons. Mara moved with a relentless focus, her eyes scanning every sign, her mind racing with memories of escape and pursuit. Jonas followed, his heart pounding, fear and guilt warring inside him. They tracked the riders to an abandoned way station, a place where the wind whistled through broken windows and the smell of old smoke lingered in the air. Mara crept through the shadows, her body tense, every sense alert. Jonas covered her from the ridge, his rifle steady in his hands. Inside, they found Finn, bound and bruised but alive, guarded by two men with hard eyes and cruel mouths. Finn's face was streaked with tears and dirt, his hands shaking as he tried to be brave. Mara moved like a shadow, silent and swift, her strength surprising even herself. She disarmed one man, her movements precise and controlled, while Jonas confronted the other, his voice cold and unyielding. The fight was brief but brutal. Mara's fear threatened to overwhelm her, the old training rising up, urging her to become the weapon they had tried to forge. She fought it back, refusing to lose herself, focusing instead on Finn's terrified eyes. Jonas made a choice in that moment, stepping between Mara and the last man, taking a blow meant for her. The pain was sharp, but it grounded him, reminded him of what was at stake. He staggered, blood seeping through his shirt, but he did not fall. When it was over, Finn clung to Mara, his small hands gripping her arm, his body trembling with shock. Jonas checked the men for signs of life, his breath ragged, his side throbbing with pain. They left the way station behind, moving quickly through the rain. Finn nestled between them on the horse. The journey back was slow, the storm relentless, But the bond between the three of them had grown stronger, forged in fear and the promise of protection. Back at Creed's End, Mara tended to Finn's wounds, her hands gentle, her voice soft. She wrapped his bruised wrists, wiped the mud from his face, and sat with him until he slept. Jonas watched her, seeing the struggle in her eyes, the fear that she might become what she had once been forced to be. He sat beside her, sharing the weight of the night, offering what comfort he could. Finn, exhausted, fell into a deep sleep, his breathing steady at last. The next day, Jonas and Mara searched the belongings of the men who had taken Finn. In a battered satchel, they found a small, leather-bound ledger. The pages were filled with names, dates, and numbers, evidence of a network that stretched far beyond Dustvale. Mara's hands shook as she read, recognizing some of the names, her own among them. The truth was laid bare. Children had been bought, sold, and broken, their lives reduced to lines in a book. Jonas felt the weight of the discovery settle over him. He knew that keeping Finn safe was no longer enough. They had to expose the truth, to bring the darkness into the light, no matter the cost. Mara looked at him, her eyes fierce and determined. She was no longer running from her past. She was ready to fight for a future. As the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows across the land, the three of them sat together on the porch, the ledger between them. The wind carried the scent of rain and the promise of change. Mara felt the old fear recede, replaced by something new, a sense of purpose, a hope that they could be more than what the world had tried to make them. Jonas reached for her hand, and Finn leaned against her side. The three of them bound together by scars, by loss, and by the unspoken vow to protect one another. Whatever darkness might come, Mara rode through the night with Jonas at her side, the battered ledger pressed tight against her chest, the wind cold and sharp as it swept across the open land. The knowledge of what they had uncovered, names, numbers, the full scale of the cruelty at Tri-Sable burned in her mind, fueling every step of their journey. Finn was gone, taken with the other children, and every hour that passed felt like a thread unraveling from the fragile hope they had built together. They reached the outskirts of Tri-Sable as dawn broke. The compound crouched low against the earth, ringed by fences and watchtowers. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and something sour, a memory of pain that clung to the stones. Mara's heart pounded as she studied the place she had once called a prison, her hands trembling not from fear, but from the weight of memory. Jonas watched her, his face drawn and pale, the wound at his side still raw beneath his shirt. He said nothing, but Mara saw the trust in his eyes, the silent promise that he would follow her wherever this path led. They waited until the sun was high, watching the guards change shifts, mapping the patterns of movement. Mara moved with a purpose that surprised even herself, her mind sharp, her senses heightened by the urgency of what was at stake. She remembered the hidden doors, the blind spots in the patrols, the way the shadows fell across the yard at midday. Jonas followed her lead, his steps careful, his breath shallow with pain. They slipped through a gap in the fence, crawling beneath the coils of wire, their bodies pressed close to the ground. Inside, the compound was a maze of corridors and locked doors, the air heavy with the echo of old cries. Mara led the way, her memory guiding her through the labyrinth. They passed rooms filled with empty beds, the walls scarred by years of neglect. In one hallway, they heard the muffled sound of children's voices, a thin thread of hope in the darkness. Mara's heart twisted as she recognized Finn's voice, steady and calm, urging the others to stay quiet, to wait for the right moment. They found the children in a locked storeroom, huddled together on the floor. Finn looked up as Mara entered, his face streaked with dirt, but his eyes bright with determination. He had kept the others calm, had whispered stories to them through the night, had promised that help would come. Mara knelt beside him, her hands gentle as she checked for injuries, her relief tempered by the knowledge that they were not yet safe. Jonas worked at the lock, his hands shaking, the pain in his side growing worse with every movement. Mara saw the blood seeping through his shirt, the way his jaw clenched against the agony. She wanted to tell him to rest, to let her handle it, but there was no time. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hall, heavy and deliberate. Mara pulled Finn and the other children behind her, her body tense, her mind racing. The door burst open and Mr. Thefos stepped into the room, his presence filling the space with a cold authority. He was older than Mara remembered, his hair gone grey, his eyes hard and calculating. He looked at her with a mixture of recognition and contempt, as if she were a problem he had thought long solved. Behind him stood a man Mara recognized, a former friend, now twisted by the experiments that had failed to break her. His body was larger, his movements stiff, his eyes empty of anything but obedience. Voss offered Mara a choice: surrender and spare the children, or fight and watch them suffer. Mara felt the old fear rise in her, the memory of being powerless, of being used. But she looked at Finn, at Jonas, at the children who watched her with wide, trusting eyes, and she knew she could not give in. The fight that followed was brutal and desperate. Jonas tried to hold off the guards, his strength failing as blood soaked his shirt. Mara faced the super soldier, her former friend, his face twisted by pain and confusion. She called his name, searching for the person he had been, but the experiments had left little behind. He attacked with a force that threatened to overwhelm her, his fists heavy, his movements relentless. Mara fought back, not with rage, but with the determination to protect. She used her strength to defend, to shield the children, to keep Jonas from harm. Each blow she landed was a plea for mercy, a silent hope that some part of her friend still remained. In the chaos, one of the guards turned on Jonas, a man Jonas had once helped, a neighbor who had fallen under Voss's sway. The betrayal cut deep, but Jonas did not falter. He blocked the blow meant for Mara, taking the brunt of the attack, his body crumpling to the floor. Pain shot through him, his vision blurring, but he forced himself to stay conscious, to watch over Mara and the children. Mara saw him fall, saw the blood pooling beneath him, and for a moment the world narrowed to a single, impossible choice. She could save Jonas, drag him to safety and leave the children behind, or she could trust him, trust that he wanted her to do what was right. Mara hesitated, her heart breaking, but then she saw Finn, standing tall among the children, his voice steady as he urged them to move, to follow the plan she had whispered to him in the dark. Finn led the way, guiding the others through the chaos, his courage shining in the darkness. Mara turned back to the fight, her body aching, her mind clear. She faced her former friend, her voice soft as she spoke his name, reminding him of who he had been. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, a memory, a fragment of the boy she had known. He hesitated, his fists dropping to his sides, and Mara seized the moment, guiding him away from the children, away from the violence. With the path clear, Mara gathered Jonas in her arms, his breath shallow, his eyes glazed with pain. She carried him through the burning corridors, the heat and smoke rising as the compound began to collapse. Finn and the children waited outside, their faces streaked with tears and soot, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and relief. Mara set Jonas down, her hands shaking as she checked his wounds. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with trust and pride. He whispered that he knew she would make the right choice, that he believed in her. Mara felt the weight of his faith settle over her, steadying her hands, calming her heart. She turned back to the compound, the flames licking at the sky, the evidence of years of cruelty burning away. She knew that by destroying the place, she was erasing the proof of what had been done. But she also knew that leaving it standing would only invite more suffering. Mara watched as the walls crumbled, as the fire consumed the darkness, and she felt a strange sense of peace. As the sun rose over the ruins of Tri-Sable, Mara knelt beside Jonas, her hand in his, her eyes on the horizon. She knew they could never return to the lives they had known, that they would be hunted for what they had done. But she also knew that they had chosen the right path, that they had saved lives, that they had become something more than what the world had tried to make them. The wind carried the scent of smoke and freedom, the promise of a new beginning. Mara stood, her body aching, but her spirit unbroken, and looked at the children gathered around her. She saw in their faces the future she had never dared to imagine, a future built on courage, on sacrifice, on the unbreakable bonds of family. Jonas squeezed her hand. His grip wished weak but sure. He told her to go, to lead the children to safety, to trust herself as he trusted her. Mara nodded, her eyes shining with tears, and turned to Finn, to the children, to the road that stretched out before them. They walked away from the flames, from the past, from the darkness that had tried to claim them. Mara led the way, her head held high, her heart full of hope and sorrow and the fierce determination to protect those who had no one else. Behind her, Jonas watched, his pride and love carrying him through the pain, his faith in Mara unshaken. As they disappeared into the morning light, the world behind them burned. But the future ahead was theirs to claim. Mara led the group away from the smoldering ruins of Tri-Sable, her steps steady though her body ached with exhaustion. The children followed close behind, their faces streaked with soot and fear, their eyes searching the horizon for any sign of pursuit. Jonas moved slowly, leaning on Finn for support, his wounds still raw beneath the makeshift bandages Mara had wrapped around his side. The land ahead was harsh and unfamiliar, but it promised safety, or at least a chance to begin again. They traveled for days, keeping to the back trails and dry creek beds, moving only at dawn and dusk. The world seemed quieter now, the threat of violence replaced by the slow, persistent ache of survival. Mara watched the children carefully, noting the way they clung to one another, the way they flinched at sudden noises, the way their laughter came in short, uncertain bursts. She remembered her own first days of freedom, the way hope had felt like a dangerous thing, and she resolved to give them something steadier to hold on to. At last, they reached Hollow Creek, a narrow valley where the grass grew tall and the water ran clear. The place was little more than a bend in the land, but to Mara it felt like a sanctuary. They set up camp beneath a stand of cottonwoods, the branches whispering overhead, the air cool and sweet after so many days of dust and fear. Jonas collapsed onto a bed of blankets, his breath shallow, his skin pale. Mara tended to him with quiet care, cleaning his wounds, changing his bandages, coaxing him to eat when he had no appetite. She saw the pain in his eyes, not just the pain of injury, but the deeper ache of loss and guilt. The children settled into a routine, their days shaped by the rhythms of the land. Mara taught them how to gather firewood, how to find edible roots and berries, how to listen for the warning calls of hawks and coyotes. She showed them how to mend torn clothes, how to set snares for rabbits, how to read the weather in the shape of the clouds. Finn became her shadow, quick to learn, eager to help, his presence a comfort to the younger children. He told stories at night, his voice low and steady, weaving tales of heroes and safe havens, of families found and dangers overcome. Jonas watched from the edge of the camp, his recovery slow and uncertain. The wound in his side throbbed with every movement, and some days he could do little more than sit in the shade and listen to the sounds of life returning around him. He felt useless at times, haunted by memories of the fire, by the faces of those he could not save. But Mara never let him drift too far into despair. She sat with him in the evenings, her silence gentle, her presence a reminder that he was not alone. As the days passed, the children began to change. The fear in their eyes faded, replaced by curiosity and, slowly, by laughter. They played in the creek, splashing water and chasing minnows, their voices echoing through the valley. They built forts from fallen branches, invented games with stones and sticks, found comfort in the simple routines of work and play. Mara watched them with a quiet pride, her heart aching with hope and sorrow in equal measure. Finn emerged as a leader among the children, his kindness and courage drawing them together. He helped the youngest with their chores, comforted those who woke from nightmares, mediated the small disputes that flared up in the close quarters of camp life. He became the bridge between the children and the adults, carrying messages, offering reassurances, reminding everyone that they were safe now, that they belonged. Mara and Jonas found themselves drawn together by the quiet hours of the evening. When the children slept and the fire burned low, they spoke in hushed tones, sharing memories they had never voiced before of families lost, of dreams abandoned, of the long, lonely years that had brought them to this place. Mara told Jonas about her childhood, about the day she was taken, about the years spent in darkness and fear. Jonas spoke of his brother, of the ranch he had tried to save, of the guilt that had followed him like a shadow. In those moments, something shifted between them. The walls they had built around their hearts began to crumble, replaced by a fragile trust, a sense of belonging neither had known in years. Mara found herself reaching for Jonas's hand, drawing strength from his presence. Jonas, in turn, leaned on Mara, letting her steadiness anchor him when the pain threatened to pull him under. One night, as a storm rolled in from the west, one of the youngest children fell ill. Her fever burned hot, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Panic rippled through the camp, the old fear returning in a rush. Mara moved quickly, gathering herbs from the creek bank, cooling the child's forehead with damp cloths, coaxing her to drink when she could. Finn sat by the girl's side, telling her stories, holding her hand through the worst of the fever. Jonas, though weak, helped as best he could, fetching water, keeping the fire burning through the long, anxious night. The group rallied together, each doing what they could. The older children took turns watching over the sick girl, the younger ones helping to gather wood and keep the camp tidy. Mara barely slept, her worry etched deep in the lines of her face. But by dawn, the fever broke and the child's breathing eased. Relief swept through the camp, the sense of danger receding, replaced by a new confidence in their ability to survive, to care for one another. In the days that followed, the mood in the camp lightened. The children's laughter grew louder, their games more daring. Jonas regained his strength, moving more easily, his color returning. He began to help with the chores, teaching the children how to whittle, how to tie knots, how to read the stars. Mara watched him with a quiet joy, grateful for his presence, for the way he brought order and comfort to their small community. The valley around Hollow Creek became a place of healing, not just for the children, but for Mara and Jonas as well. They learned to trust each other, to lean on one another, to share the burdens of leadership and care. The scars they carried on their bodies, in their hearts, did not disappear. But they became part of the story they were building together. As summer deepened, the group began to talk of the future. Some of the older children dreamed of finding their families, of returning to the towns they had left behind. Others wanted to stay, to build something new in the safety of the valley. Mara and Jonas listened, weighing the risks, the hopes, the possibilities. They knew the world beyond Hollow Creek was still dangerous, that the shadows of the past might one day return. But, for now, they chose to live in the present, to savor the peace they had fought so hard to find. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of gold and crimson, Mara sat beside Jonas on the bank of the creek, their hands entwined. The children played nearby, their laughter rising above the murmur of the water. Mara felt a sense of contentment settle over her, a quiet certainty that she had found her place, that she belonged. Jonas squeezed her hand, his eyes soft with gratitude and love. They watched the stars appear, one by one, in the deepening sky. The fire crackled behind them, the air filled with the scent of grass and wood smoke. Mara listened to the sounds of the camp, the gentle breathing of the children, the soft rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl. She knew there would be challenges ahead, that the peace they had found was fragile. But she also knew they would face whatever came together, as a family. As dawn broke over Hollow Creek, painting the world in shades of pink and gold, Mara rose to greet the new day. She moved through the camp, checking on each child, her heart full of hope and quiet pride. Jonas joined her, his steps sure, his presence a comfort. together. They watched the children wake, their faces bright with the promise of another day. In that moment, beneath the wide western sky, Mara understood what it meant to belong not just to a place, but to a people, to a family forged in fire and loss and the slow, patient work of healing. And as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the valley, she knew that whatever the future held, they would meet it together, strong in the bonds they had built on the ashes of the past. Mara woke to the sound of birdsong drifting through the cottonwoods, the first light of morning painting Hollow Creek in soft gold. The air was cool and clear, carrying the scent of wildflowers and wood smoke. She lay still for a moment, listening to the gentle stirrings of the camp around her, the quiet laughter of children, the low murmur of Jonas's voice as he stoked the fire, the distant splash of Finn skipping stones across the creek. For the first time in years, Mara felt a sense of peace that ran deeper than exhaustion, a quiet certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The days that followed were filled with the slow, patient work of building a home. Jonas, his strength returned, led the effort to raise new shelters from timber and stone, his hands steady as he taught the older children how to measure, how to saw, how to fit each piece together so that it would stand against the wind. Mara worked beside him, her movements sure and graceful, guiding the younger ones as they planted a garden, dug a well, and learned to care for the land that had given them refuge. Finn became the heart of the new community, his kindness and courage drawing the children together, his laughter a thread of hope that wove through every day. They named their settlement New Haven, a promise to themselves and to anyone who might come after. Word of what they had survived began to spread, carried by letters Jonah sent to distant towns and by the battered ledger Mara entrusted to a traveling preacher. The story of Tres Sabele and its crimes reached the ears of those who could not ignore it: reporters, lawmen, and strangers who had lost their own to the darkness. Soon, riders arrived at Hollow Creek, bringing questions, bringing help, bringing the first glimmers of justice. There were moments of fear, times when the sound of hooves on the ridge or the sight of a stranger's coat made old wounds ache. But Mara stood firm, her eyes clear, her heart steady. She knew that freedom was not the absence of danger, but the courage to choose one's place in the world and defend it. Jonas stood beside her, his presence a quiet reassurance, his faith in their new life unshaken. Finn, growing taller and stronger with each passing week, became a leader among the children, teaching them the skills he had learned, reminding them that they were not alone. The seasons turned, and New Haven grew. The garden flourished, the houses stood strong against the storms, and the laughter of children echoed through the valley. Mara watched as the scars on their bodies and in their hearts faded, replaced by the marks of hard work and shared joy. She saw the way Jonas smiled now, the way he reached for her hand without hesitation, the way he spoke of the future with hope instead of regret. She saw Finn's confidence blossom, his voice steady as he settled disputes, comforted the frightened, and dreamed aloud of the world they were building together. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and violet, the community gathered around a fire. The children sang songs they had learned from Mara and Jonas, their voices rising into the night. Finn told a story of their journey, his words weaving together sorrow and triumph, fear and courage, loss and belonging. Mara listened, her heart full, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She realized that she was smiling not the careful, guarded smile she had worn for so long, but a true, unburdened smile that reached all the way to her soul. Jonas sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his gaze soft and steady. He had found his purpose again, not in the land or the work alone, but in the people who had come to depend on him, in the family they had chosen and built together. He no longer carried the weight of guilt alone. He shared it with Mara, with Finn, with every child who called New Haven home. As the fire burned low and the stars appeared overhead, Mara looked around at the faces illuminated by the warm glow. She saw hope where once there had been only fear, saw strength where there had been only pain. She understood, at last, that freedom was not something given or taken, but something claimed, an act of will, a leap of faith, a promise kept in the face of uncertainty. The dangers of the world had not vanished. There were still shadows on the horizon, still rumors of men who might come seeking revenge or silence. But Mara no longer felt the urge to run. She knew that whatever came, they would face it together, not as fugitives, but as a family. New Haven was more than a refuge. It was a declaration, a place where the lost and broken could become whole again. As dawn broke over the valley, painting the world in colors of hope, Mara stood at the edge of the creek, watching the water flow past the stones. She felt Jonas's hand slip into hers, felt Finn's laughter ring out behind her, felt the steady heartbeat of a community that had chosen to stand and build rather than flee. She knew there would be hard days ahead, but she also knew that they had already survived the worst the world could offer. In the end, it was not the absence of fear that defined their freedom, but the choice to belong to each other, to the land, to the future they were shaping with every sunrise. Mara smiled, her heart light, her spirit unbroken, and turned to face the new day, ready to claim whatever it might bring.